We haven't got the forces to fight. NATO hasn't got the forces to fight. They talk as if they have, but the reality is they haven't. The moment the state or commercial interests get hold of children, huge amounts of money start to exchange hands. We're in an era where the state is openly declaring that it has precedence in the parenting of children.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Resistance Podcast. Today I'm joined by Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Mike Robinson. I'm co-editor of the UK column, and we live in Plymouth. We have a regular news programme, and we produce other material for our website.
Brian Gerrish, I work with Mike and the UK column team. We couldn't do what we do without the full team that help us. And we're doing the best to put out news media which is accurate, telling the truth, and is really explaining to people what's happening in the world.
And for many people, they will recognise you, but for a lot of people, they haven't got into UK column yet. So I want to just say, you guys are some of my heroes in what you've done and setting up UK column. Can I ask, how long ago was it that you set up the column?
That's a very good question, and I should be able to automatically give you the right date. 2006.
2006 is the correct date. I joined in 2008, but Brian had been running it for a couple of years before that. Because
you started with a newspaper, didn't you?
We started with an A4 sheet of paper. This I think is one of the great things about our story. Where did we start? We started when we printed an A4 sheet on both sides, and we distributed 500 of them in Plymouth. It was a little bit private eye in style, because we were talking about the fraud and corruption and problems in the city, but we tried to keep a bit of a sense of humour about it. We put out 500 the first month. The second month we did 500. The third month, we went to an A3 sheet folded. That means you get 4 pages.
Oh.
So that was a big improvement. And then really what happened at that stage was the telephone started to ring, and people said to us, "You really want to know what's going on? Did you know this?" And they would tell us things that were happening in the city. Most of it was around fraud and corruption and misuse of public money.
So what were some of the first, busts or stories that you got starting out?
Well, the key story which came through very quickly was at that stage, a lot of funding was coming in from the European Union. Came in under a number of different labels, so it could be part of regeneration funds from the European Union. But these were sums of money. They could be 500,000, they could be £1 million. Cities were bidding for this European money in order supposedly to help regeneration programs or help communities. But what we saw happening in Plymouth, and it was happening in other cities, is the money was never accounted for properly. So it came in as a grant, and then it was split down into ever smaller pots of money. And then it was either frittered away, so you said, well, what was the benefit of the money? Or you saw it going effectively into people's pockets.
Weddings and so on.
Yeah, on one occasion, we were very confident that £5,000 from one grant fund that had come into Plymouth actually went to pay for somebody's wedding. But if you want to get into the big scale stuff that people started to talk about, there was 320 million of Objective 1 funding went into Cornwall, and nobody ever saw the accounts for where that money went. 320 million into Cornwall, nobody could ever show where this money was spent. But of course, it all disappeared.
Oh, someone's got a nice second home, or maybe very many people. And so when was it you first went digital with everything?
2014 2014, I think we decided to start the news program of a form, and then we had been contacted by some friends or some people in Dublin who became friends who had been running a sort of radio show online, and they wanted to help us with that. And well, we just thought, if it's going to be radio, we might as well do video at the same time. And so we thought, well, how are we going to do this? And are we going to take some time to sort of work out how to do it, or are we just going to get on with it and not worry about how bad it is at the beginning? And that's what we chose to do at the end of the day. And it was pretty bad in the first few episodes, but we got the hang of it after a while, and we've been going ever since.
I know what you mean. Some of my first videos were so janky and terrible. But the thing is, you grow with it and you learn.
Right.
And
it's the only way to do it, actually. It's just to do it and not worry about what it looks like at the beginning, and then you get on with it.
Because I think people are hungry for real journalism. Is that, well, what was it that really inspired you to start it, Brian, and for you to jump on board?
Well, the key bit for me is that I started to see wrongdoing and criminal activity on a scale which was really mind-boggling, and I suppose you could say part of it was my background. I'd done 20 years in the Navy, where you believe you are serving your country. I then become a civilian, and I'm watching money being used fraudulently, and so I stepped forward to try and expose what was going on. But the first thing you discover is that none of the normal media channels will talk about this sort of stuff. So how are you going to counter it? You've got to talk about it yourself. And so those initial sheets of paper that we put out was the start. But before we got to the full video and broadcasting and news online, we were actually printing a full newspaper format, and in the years that we were producing that, we produced, I think it was about 900,000 copies we got out. And I say for the audience, it was actually very similar to the Light, but the Light has gone on to produce something that actually is similar to where we were with the UK column. And we think it's utterly brilliant. We've moved on to video and audio because it allows you to keep up to speed with what's happening. But it's great to see that the Light team are putting out that newspaper, because we were doing that, 10 years ago, weren't we? Yeah.
I've got to say, Daz's work has been absolutely excellent, and all the rest of the team at the Light.
Right.
Because sometimes it's better to go back to physical in a way, because it's something that you can hand over to someone else. It's great to have the digital, and people send our videos and they send your videos and they send links over, but having that physical thing that you can hand and you can post.
Well, it's more than that, isn't it? Because we're increasingly seeing this censorship regime roll out online, and they are basically able to skirt around the outside of that and not worry about that too much. So they're able to get information to people and not really worry about the fact they're going to be deplatformed or whatever it happens to be. So there's a lot to be said for print publication still, and there's definitely a market for it, and people are looking for something that they can actually hold in their hands.
Why do you think it is that the mainstream media is so controlled or so homogenous in their point of view?
It's because they have forgotten how to fund themselves. Well, that's maybe a bit unfair. The internet has taken away their advertising revenue and the print. So because the internet is basically free for most people, why would people buy a newspaper when they can get the same information online for nothing? So the mainstream media has attempted to move from a print product to a digital product, but they have lost the ability to raise advertising finance in the same way that they were able to with the print product. And the advertising online is absolutely sewn up and whatnot. So financially they're stuffed. They've got a journalism base that they've got to try to fund, and they can't really fund it. So they're relying therefore on government funding, and funding from foundations and think tanks and these kinds of things. And therefore, just as with the climate situation and climate scientists having to look for certain types of funding, and that funding is only available if you're pushing a certain type of narrative. It's exactly the same in the mainstream press. They are unable to fund themselves by telling the truth, so they simply lie.
Are they completely unable? Because, I mean, you've shown that you're just about able to fund yourselves telling the truth. And I'm pretty sure if they had mainstream appeal and they already had a mainstream audience, they wouldn't be starting at the same disadvantage that you are.
No, we've got to be realistic about this. We are niche, right? The Spectator is niche. The Private Eye, as Brian mentioned, is niche. So there is a niche audience if you've got a particular product, but a mass product is not sustainable. With a mass media product is not sustainable because people won't pay for it. And so they've got themselves in the problem that because they're not telling the truth, that even turns more people off. And so they cannot fund themselves in the normal ways, at least the ways that they did historically. So they've stuffed themselves, and the only way to exist now is to produce a niche product, but that's then limited in what it won't get the sort of audiences that mainstream media has historically got.
What do you think also of the idea? Because I completely understand and I agree. What do you think of the idea as well that more and more millionaires and billionaires are buying newspapers as a means of political donation rather than just donate money directly? Because we've seen, what was it, Lord Lebedev, so-called
Lebedev,
Lord,
yeah.
who I think was it the Evening Standard or something that he bought?
Yeah.
And then it was made a peer and everything by, I think it was David Cameron. Because of the influence that he held. Are we seeing these sort of literally media barons pop up?
Well, I think we are, and this is a key problem because the bigger media outlets are not doing it for the simple purpose of journalism. There's another agenda running in the background, which is that they're putting out a coordinated political message, and The Guardian is a newspaper to look at with interest because The Guardian says, it's the Guardian of independent reporting. But what's behind it? The Scott Trust, which is actually controlling it very tightly. And who's putting the money into the Scott Trust? So at the end of the day, the media's being controlled because the media is a tool of the political powers. So we don't, in my opinion, we don't have independent media in UK for the mainstream media. BBC is the arch monster because it's swallowing billions of pounds and it's simply producing propaganda.
Well, do you think that someone working for the BBC could even be a journalist, given the fact that they are funded purely by government, or almost purely by government? I know they do some resales overseas, etc.
I think that they believe they're journalists, but the BBC, for example, when they're training the next generation of journalists, they include the climate change topic as a specific training area. So if you're doing that, you can't. Whoever's coming out of that training process at the end can't be considered to be independent, or because you've actually taught them this is how you should be thinking on climate change. The BBC claims that they're balanced, so they give multiple views on things, except when it comes to climate, for example, because they've absolutely stated that why would we give a platform to somebody who denies, as they describe it, the climate crisis? So the BBC has demonstrated that they're not interested in the truth or in investigation. They have a preconceived policy of what their journalists, in inverted commas, should be putting out. And of course, that's very difficult for them. And the people that, for the journalists, I mean, and the people that we know that have been reporting on various topics, like Vanessa Beeley in Syria, for example, every time she comes into contact with a BBC journalist and she asks them, why are you reporting this in this way? Because she's making the point that they're being dishonest about how they're reporting. And of course, they don't have an answer to that, yet they still do it. So whether that's just that this is the way for them to progress their careers within the BBC, and the BBC being funded by effectively taxpayers.
Bullying pensioners a lot of the time.
Right. So, there's no. The BBC is effectively a monopoly, and it doesn't have to compete with anybody. It doesn't have to do a better job than anybody else. It just has to do the job that government wants.
Meanwhile, the formerly Manchester Guardian couldn't be any further from where it was when it first was founded, because it was founded, after the Peterloo massacre.
Right.
When Shelley wrote The Mask of Anarchy, and you had soldiers cutting down peaceful protesters, almost the same as what we saw during the lockdowns. You've got the police coming in, battering people over the heads. And where were they?
Julian Assange is an example of this, because Julian Assange was the poster child of the Guardian at the beginning, and they basically turned the whole situation around and became an enemy of him at the end of the day. So they don't have any particular morality or they're certainly not standing on truthfulness.
Yeah, this is true. What was in my mind when you were talking about the BBC is, of course, the other thing that a lot of people in the country just don't realise is the close association between the BBC and the government. And the key thing with this is BBC monitoring, which has consistently been I'll call it a quasi-intelligent asset. So BBC monitoring news reported in overseas countries, but their reports directly reported back into British intelligence services. So the BBC's had a dedicated team working alongside British intelligence, but to people overseas, they think, this is marvellous because the BBC's got language specialists and they're listening to what's happening in Pakistan and all the rest of it. But this isn't being done in a benign way. This is being done in a way where the British government can use BBC monitoring's assessment of overseas news in order to guide its policies in these areas.
Meanwhile, the World Service can help shape public opinion overseas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we can't forget BBC Media Action, which is a charity which is going overseas and training journalists overseas in the BBC mould. And so if we look at Syria as an example, they did this in Syria, and then the journalists that they trained in Syria were used as the independent voices on the ground in Syria, which were then used by Channel 4 News and other news broadcasters in the UK to present a pro-British government position. So we trained the journalists. We then didn't declare to the British public that we trained those journalists, but we used those journalists as independent voices when we presented the Syrian situation back in the UK again. Yes.
When they were affiliated with the government over here.
Exactly.
And we were that close to a war in Syria with us intervening.
The British government wanted the war. In my opinion, this wasn't an iffy thing. The British government was angling to get war in Syria in order to certainly depose the Assad government. And one of the key women who was one of the project managers in BBC Media Action, Juliet Harkin, is on record saying that we worked with people who were challenging the government. So the BBC had its people operating in Syria, helping to foment unrest.
Do you guys think, have you guys heard of the idea of the global American empire? The idea that the sort of petrodollar is based on the Americans invading every single country that attempts to trade oil outside of the petrodollar?
Brian and I may disagree on this a little bit. I don't know, he can speak for himself in a minute, but my view is that America is how do we describe this? They're the sort of bulldog that is the attack dog that is sent out to actually put boots on the ground and and sort out various regimes. But the thinking behind it is all British. So, we were talking about BBC Media Action there. In fact, if you look at the amount of money and the projects that the British Foreign Office is putting money into, and they are financing organisations that are there to foment issues in countries where they want to see regime change. And that might mean that at some point there are going to be boots on the ground, or there's going to be some kind of aerial attack or some kind of intervention militarily.
This is a very sad little clip of the mass graves in Ukraine. And of course, the one thing that nobody's talking about in UK at the moment is the number of dead in Ukraine. Estimates are up around the 500,000 dead on the Ukrainian side, and maybe as many as 100,000 on the Russian side. Does the BBC talk about this? Do the MPs talk about it? No, because they are callously using the Ukrainians as the proxy war. So I've looked around here and I've watched people, and I can't see anybody here that gets up in the morning with a cup of tea and says, "Darling, I think it would be good to have a war today." So there's nothing wrong with us. Well, it's very easy to see that we've got politicians that we simply can't trust because they are not stopping this violence and the killing. They are increasing it by pumping in the weapons.
But the original idea, it seems to be coming from the UK, and you might have a different view.
No, I don't. I think there's a lot of truth in this, and for the invasion of Iraq, it was very clear that the US wanted commitment from UK, that the UK would put military forces in to help the invasion of Iraq. The Americans didn't need us there. They could do it on their own, but it's something like, we're not going to move unless the British are there with us. And you often look at Ukraine at the moment. We effectively do not have a competent military force anymore. Air Force, Navy, particularly the Army. The Army doesn't really exist. There's so few troops. But alongside the Americans, we're in Ukraine. We're clearly assisting the surveillance and targeting of weapons. And it's like the Americans need us there. We've got a controlling function. It's difficult to say, here's a document that says how it works. But if you just follow it through, it seems that every time the Americans are acting, whether it's in Libya or Iraq or Ukraine or Syria, the British are always there in the background.
An example of that was 2013. We were intending to bomb Syria, but
that was narrowly voted down because Ed Miliband opposed it last
But that was
minute.
voted down in the House of Commons. And then the Americans decided they could not proceed because Britain had decided no. So it's a fascinating relationship there, this so-called special relationship between Britain and the United States.
And now you look at it and you see Syria is the more stable country as compared to Libya, which has turned into a hellhole.
Well, because we decided that the Gaddafi was going to go, and that was the end of it. Yes, but a lot of the arms that were in Libya went off to other countries, including Syria, and actually some ended up in Ukraine as well. Following, so the chaos that happened in Libya has spawned a whole raft of other stuff that's gone on in the Middle East.
So a bit more into the BBC, and it's our friend Keir Starmer, but just look at him. He's got the suit on and the tie and the glasses, and he's basically saying, trust me, because he's courting veterans and military people. He was down in Aldershot. So trust me, I'm going to look after you. How am I going to do it? I'm ready for the next war. And they are already talking about a form of conscription to get youngsters into. So we need to deal with these people and call them out. And he's also the man, of course, who was scurrilous in saying he's not really interested in Westminster. He can only get business done in Davos. So he's saying he's not interested in this country or the democratic systems with all their faults. He's saying he's going to do his business elsewhere.
So I wanted to ask, you talked about our armed forces being run down. I'd love to ask, what is the situation of our armed forces at the moment? How much combat capability is there?
Well, effectively, they're destroyed. In my opinion, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, but I did my 21 years military service in the Navy. I left in 93. What's happened since then is a constant decline in the armed forces across the board. So the number of aircraft and personnel in the Air Force, the number of personnel in the Army, and number of ships and personnel in the Navy decrease. And if we take the Army at the moment and say that they are accepting that they could probably put 20,000 men into the field for a short period of time. But if you look about what's happening in Ukraine, the Russians have now mobilized about 800,000 troops. 800,000 troops. We're not even in the game. So one of the things that I'm always amazed of is that we've got government ministers on a world stage talking as though we've got this incredible military capability. Aside from the nuclear weapons, the conventional forces do not exist anymore. So we can then say perhaps this is the reason why we're in this horrible situation where we are fighting a proxy war through Ukraine. Ukrainians are dying in order for the West to try and destabilize Putin and break up Russia. We haven't got the forces to fight. NATO hasn't got the forces to fight. They talk as if they have, but the reality is they haven't.
Not even the Americans.
Well, the Americans are different. The Americans have got the troops. The Americans have got the ships. The Americans have got the aircraft. But in my opinion, the reason why we're not going to see the Americans face off against the Russians is because America is shy of casualties. So the reason the Vietnam War came to a close is because the number of body bags coming back in the States eventually affected public opinion to the extent that they wanted the war stopped. It was the body bags. The Russians, they work on a background that in the Second World War, they lost 30 million military and civilians killed. So casualties, as far as the Russians are concerned, are in a different league. So in Ukraine at the moment, the best figures I've seen are that probably the Russians have lost somewhere between about 80 and 100,000 men killed. If we say it's 100,000, that's 5 times the size of the force that the UK can even put on the battlefield. The Russians have things. So the Americans are not going to go into Ukraine because the casualties for the Americans are going to be vast.
And there's also the opportunity for nuclear war. Can I ask, what is your opinion as a naval officer? Does Trident work at all?
Well, this is an interesting subject because I know there are some people that have got questions and queries about nuclear weapons. In my opinion, from what I have seen at the time and what we were taught in the training, everything says to me nuclear weapons are real and their destructive power now is so vast, it puts all the stuff in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are just small bombs. So the nuclear weapons are real and everybody is scared of somebody using them because it is mutual destruction. Once somebody goes nuclear, where does it end?
But when we've tested Trident,
It's fair.
It got some sort of nuclear dysfunction, you might call it.
Well, this is true. So what I would have to say to this is one of the results of the actual rundown of the Navy in UK. We've seen all sorts of problems, particularly with the submarine service. So we've seen nuclear submarines that have been unable to go to sea due to defects and problems. And then, as you're saying, we've seen Trident missiles launched and those missiles going rogue and dropping back into the sea. The only thing I can say to you is that is that it doesn't matter what country is producing what weapons system. There are problems sometimes, and they don't work. Would they work on the day? Yes, I believe they would.
Do you?
I do, yeah.
It's a bit of a risk to take, isn't it? Because I believe they tested it once, it failed. They left it years and years and years before they tested it again.
Failed.
Failed again. I mean, for me, if I were Defence Secretary, I would say, okay, well, get in line, test it again next week.
Well, now you're into a different area because you're saying a certain action should be taken as a result of what took place, and I absolutely agree with that. But within any weapons system, you can get defects in a batch.
But why would you not, rather than leave it years and years without a nuclear test after your last one failed, just go, okay, we're going to run this test again. From my perspective, it looks like they're scared of testing it a second time, because if they do and it fails a second time, then it will look completely impotent. They've left it yonks. This is the second test and it's failed again.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that looks like our nuclear weapons. It's not the theory of it. Of course, there are nukes, but in actual practice, I think the hardware doesn't seem to work.
But Trident in the UK is only a small part of sort of NATO's arsenal, and so the question is there still a threat of the West using nuclear weapons? I think there is. I think that what we saw with Trident is symptomatic of the breakdown that Britain in particular has experienced over the last lot of years. But and whether that expands, I mean, we have seen to some degree, haven't we, that the United States has had issues with aircraft carriers and submarines and so on. So perhaps there's a little bit of this same type of breakdown happening, but the scale of this US military base, they spend so much money on their capability than we do. I think they still have the ability to produce a result at the end of the day, even though sometimes they appear to be experiencing some of the same types of breakdown that we've seen.
Yeah. The other point is that Trident is a strategic weapon. You are going to use Trident at the stage when it's all out nuclear war. What is the real risk? The real risk is that somebody uses a tactical weapon on the battlefield in order to try and counter the fact that they are losing the battle with troops. This is the real risk. But this is a very interesting discussion. The Russians have said outright they are not going to use nuclear weapons. And I think actually that statement for the Russians is true, because they have conventional military capability, which means they can continue to prosecute the war. They're taking casualties, big casualties. The Russians are being hurt in what they're doing, but they don't need to use nuclear weapons because they've got sufficient conventional forces, and they can also produce the ammunition and the munitions to continue to fight the war. The West can't. And so Ukraine at the moment is losing ground. They're horrific casualties. 500,000 killed is one of the figures that I'm hearing at the moment.
And millions who fled.
And millions injured.
And we had Zelensky last week saying, we don't have any more people. We can't keep continuing this. If the West doesn't contribute more, we are going to run out of people. So that's the first time. I don't know if you've heard him saying anything like this before, but that's the first time I heard him acknowledging the scale of the deaths that Ukraine has experienced, and the fact that they don't have people to replace them.
Yeah, but not exactly in an empathetic way.
No, absolutely not.
It seems to be a bit of concern for his own position, isn't it?
For sure.
Yeah.
So the thing is about the West as well, we're quite vulnerable with the level of technology that we're using, aren't we? With the high specifications of the kit that's being used.
Well, one of the things that I have seen over a number of years is, and I think the Americans in particular fall foul of it, they've begun to believe their own propaganda. So when a weapon system is produced by the West, I mean, take Patriot. So the Americans produced the Patriot missile system and they're selling it all around the world, and it's apparently the missile system and it's going to provide overwhelming protection. A lot of this is hype because they want to sell missile systems and their advertising is really good. But is the missile as good as they say? No. It's outclassed at the moment by a number of Russian systems in particular, and the Americans have not got anything to compete with hypersonic missile systems, which the Russians have got. But everything around the sale of American military equipment is absolute hype and sales. Sales and propaganda. We produce the best tanks. We produce the best anti-tank missile. This is the hype, but the reality on the battlefield in Ukraine is showing this is not true, because all of the supposedly the best American equipment is being taken out by the Russians. The Abrams tanks are being destroyed without any problem. All of the Bradley fighting vehicles are being taken out. All of the ATACMS missile systems are being destroyed. So everything that's being fielded by the West, including UK and the Challenger tanks, the Russians are happily destroying. And this is because for years there has been an absolute lie on the public. I wonder what that is.
Are those the red arrows?
Where are they?
Oh.
Yes, it is the red arrows, yeah.
Oh.
So there we are, as we're having a discussion on military matters. In the sky, we've seen two groups of what we think are the red arrows. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But yeah, the public in UK and in the NATO countries have been told for years that everything is fine in NATO and we're producing equipment. But what's actually been happening is the military system has been hollowed out. It's been fascinating to watch. It's also been happening in America. Has America got any battlefield experience against a proper adversary like Russia? No.
Well, there's a lot of criticism in the Ukraine because the Americans are coming down to train these Ukrainians. But the thing is, the Ukrainians are fighting trench warfare. And this is, I want your perspective, because I was listening to a military analyst a few weeks ago, and he was saying that during the Second World War, that we had a lot of static trench warfare, apart from the blitzkrieg at the start. Ukraine was always one of the most mobile battlefields during the Second World War. It's generally quite flat without, a huge amount of mountains, etc. And for that to turn into trench warfare, do you think the next world war or big war that kicks off, it's just going to be static trenches going on and on?
Ukraine's interesting because is it static? It isn't actually static. It's moving, but it's moving very slowly. So one of the things at the moment is in Western reports of what's happening in Ukraine, they are simply not talking about the fact that at the moment I'm 24 hours behind the times because I haven't been looking at Ukraine reports. But up until a couple of days ago, the Russians are taking ground. But they're not doing it in the style of a blitzkrieg. So what they're doing is they are minimizing losses by using small groups of military to take a small amount of ground at a time. And the other thing to remember in Ukraine is a lot of it is absolutely urban fighting. So they are fighting to clear high-rise buildings, or what they call the dacha areas, where you've got open areas of smaller dwellings and gardens, tree lines, hedges, and those have got to be cleared by squads of men a step at a time. So the reality at the moment is the Russians are advancing a kilometre, they're advancing 500 yards, they're advancing 2.5 kilometres. But this is going on every couple of days. It's like a lava flow. And why are they doing this? Because we're now into the era of drone warfare. And the reality is that troops are highly vulnerable to being detected by the drones. So you can't have armoured warfare in the style that we've seen it previously, because drones are able to detect the areas where you're building up the forces, and then once the attack starts, the drones are pinpointing exactly what's happening. So it's become much more fragmented warfare. But at the moment, even on the drone front, the Russians are outclassing anything that the West has got, with the capability of the drones, and also with the electronic warfare systems that the Russians are using in order to prevent the Ukrainians from using Western drones. It's not perfect. That doesn't mean to say that on any day the Russians are just winning hands down. They're, as I'm saying, they're taking severe casualties in some places, but the Russians are prepared to take the casualties, and then ultimately they are taking territory. So Ukraine is losing, but it's not like 20 miles has been taken in a day. It's that over the course of a month, the Russians have moved forward at 5 miles, 7 miles.
What do you think the future of warfare is going to be with drones and AI and other technology?
I think we've already seen the future of warfare. We are and have been for a number of years in a hybrid war. So it's information, it's cyber, it's now kinetic in Ukraine and in Gaza, and it's kinetic in parts of Africa as well. Sahel is a really key region as far as the West is concerned, because Russia and China have a significant influence there. But the war has been running for a number of years now on multiple levels, and information is right at the heart of it, because of course, in order to justify Ukraine or Gaza or whatever it is, you've got to have control of the narrative. And if you don't have control of the narrative, then you can't get public support for what you're doing.
Talking about control of information, control in the narrative, what have you guys faced in UK Column in terms of censorship, and how are you surviving?
We have been deplatformed from YouTube. We've been shadow banned. Well, we've now been deplatformed from Facebook as well. It took them a long time to get round to it, but they've done it now. Shadow banned on various other platforms. We've experienced exactly the same as many, many other people have experienced. What was slightly frustrating about YouTube in particular was, of course, the topic that they deplatformed us for was vaccines. And we covered the story of a lady whose husband had been turned into a quadriplegic by the AstraZeneca vaccine. That video was taken down by YouTube, and then they started looking back through previous videos, and they found 2 other videos that they decided were not meeting community standards, and that was 3 strikes, so we were completely out. The frustrating thing was that 2 or 3 weeks later, the Daily Mail covered the same story. And of course, they suffered no sanction. So, we have been talking about the censorship regime that's been building since 2017.
Do you want to say how many days a week you're doing this and what the scale of the operation is? Because you've got articles, right? You've got special reports. You've got shows almost every other day.
Well, when we started doing the news program, we initially started it 5 days a week, and we got into this kind of hamster wheel situation where we couldn't develop the organization because we were just doing the news program. So we moved to 3 days a week, and then what we've done since then is for the other 2 days we're doing interviews with people, and that's working very well. But we also do sort of written material as well on the website as well. So we've always been multimedia in this way. We never really stopped, even though we stopped doing the print publication, we didn't stop producing written material on the website. And we were doing live events too up until COVID, and then we haven't done anything since 2020. We're just about to do our first live event since COVID in October this year in Bristol.
Oh, what date is that?
19th.
Oh, well, I guess
right.
a lot of people can jump on.
The venue will be announced in due course, but we're not going to announce the venue just yet for the obvious reasons. Just before in the run up to COVID, we'd been running a series of events called Media on Trial, where we were basically highlighting the pro-war agenda of the mainstream media. And the last event we did on that was due to be held in Leeds. It was going to be held in Leeds Library, which was, of course, run by the council. The council then banned us from Leeds Library. And then because we were banned from Leeds Library, we couldn't get into other venues around the place because they followed the lead of the council, as it were. And eventually that particular event ended up being held in the grounds of a mosque, which was the only organisation that was prepared to allow us to hold the event, apparently. But then COVID came along. We haven't done anything since, and this is going to be the first one. But we're still a little bit conscious of the possibility that we would be, or the venue would be encouraged to cancel us. And so we're not going to announce the name of the venue until closer to the time.
Well, of course.
So the other one we should mention is the @VOD attempt at censorship, isn't it, Mike?
Right. So right back in 2015, a subsidiary of Ofcom was the Authority for Television on Demand, and this was regulating on-demand video, mainly apparently set up to deal with online pornography. But they had received a complaint about a news program we did where we covered a case of child sexual abuse on a girl called Holly Gregg. And they decided that following that complaint that we should be regulated by them. And we decided that we were not prepared to be regulated by them.
Good.
And so what we did was they basically gave us a deadline that we had to submit to their regulation, or if we didn't submit to the regulation, they would be entitled to fine us anything up to £250,000. And so we decided that the best way to deal with this was through publicity. So we basically took all our YouTube content offline and advised people that we were not going to be able to produce a news program because of this. Because one of the things that we decided to do was to make ourselves look like the mainstream media, but to put out information that you wouldn't see on the mainstream media, in the sort of hope and expectation that the people that were used to seeing information on mainstream would engage with that because it was familiar. Right.
I think that's a really good tactic, by the way.
Right. Well, AdFOD decided that because we looked like the mainstream media, that this made us fall under their remit. And so then what we did was we started producing content which didn't look like mainstream media, and we focused on AdFOD themselves. And as a result, their telephone lines were shut down because there was so much demand. There were so many people making phone calls to them that they just closed their lines for about a week or two anyway. And AdFOD was gone in a year. Now,
that is a great victory.
Yes, it was a great victory. It was a small victory, but it was a great victory because, of course, the process, the regulation that they were doing moved back into Ofcom. Ofcom never bothered us again until the Online Safety Act, and then the media bill is coming. In the next government, we'll see the media bill, which is bringing back this same type of regulation. So it didn't stop the agenda completely, but it delayed it by 10 years. And this, I feel that this is what we need to be doing. We don't need to win. We just need to keep pushing the agenda back and back and back and back. And so small victories are sufficient to do that. And people are looking at what's going on in the world and they're saying, this is too big. What can we do about this? You just have to win the small victories. And small victories, if you can win enough of them, turn into big victories.
There's something really nasty is coming through the pipeline. I think a lot of people sense it now. They sense something's wrong. Maybe if you ask them what is wrong, they can't tell you, but they sense something is wrong. But it's clear that policies are coming down this pipeline from people who appear to be sociopaths or appear to be something worse. Maybe they're psychopaths. But the policies tell us that essentially they don't have basic human instincts. And we've got to be really wary of what these individuals are doing, particularly with our children. Now, I wanted to mention this lady, Kim Isherwood, and she's one of the ladies in Wales that have been speaking out about the appalling sex education for very young children. And if in this audience there's still mums and dads who are not aware of this stuff that's going on in schools, you need to be, because it is utterly disgusting. And what's happening here is that a group of mums, this lady is one of them, have been taking action. They've been trying to take the Welsh government, well, they did take the Welsh government to court, but of course the Welsh government's got tons of money to protect itself. But nevertheless, in the publicity, they caused great upset in the establishment because ordinary people, in this case, many women with some men, some dads, were able to challenge the government in Wales about these educational policies for the children, causing very, very young children great stress and angst. If we just do the basic one, that you have little girls and little boys that are just trying to learn about being alive, being told that they don't even know whether they are a girl or a boy. So these ladies have been incredibly brave, and from 2 or 3 of them, they've achieved a huge amount just by sticking together, staying on target with the authorities and doing a great job. So there are lots of other groups around the country, and sometimes the groups will say to us, yes, but did we actually achieve anything? And I always say to them, yes, you do achieve something, and yes, you did, because it's driving a wedge into a crack. Initially, you can hammer that wedge really hard and nothing seems to happen. But when enough wedges go in, the crack runs and the thing splits. So I just wanted to say, never ever give up. If you're out there fighting the system, each and every one of you is important in what you do. This is just me saying on a key subject that I've covered over many years. You have to understand that the political system wants your children, wants our children. In Scotland, and it was David Scott that talked about this some time ago, but the Scottish government putting in a named person, and that person was to be the child's guardian appointed by the state from conception. And in an open debate, a female Scottish MP, I should have checked the name, it's gone out of my head at the moment, but this lady was on record, she's talking to the audience and they were fighting back a little bit. And she said, well, don't worry, you, the parents, will also have a role in bringing up your children. Right? So there is no doubt about where they're going. And this lady is on screen because she's came to UK as a refugee. She was trafficked. She went through a horrible experience and brutally used before she got to this country. And then when she gets here with one child she was able to bring across to live in UK with her. Then she had another child. And what happens, those 2 children have been taken away from her. She's never hurt them. She's never done anything to them, all on the risk of future emotional harm, decided in a court with a judge and no jury and no press. And I stand here, and I've said this many times from the stage, the family court system is a closed court. And if you get into it, you have no way of getting justice because it's a star chamber. Everything is against you. Are they taking children, hundreds of them, thousands of them, under false pretenses, lies, perjury, false documentation, false accusations? It's an industry. And our future is the children. So if we don't get to grips with this, okay, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth now, but I've got grandchildren, and I'm thinking, blimey, if we don't stop this, they have no security against the state simply taking your children.
But at the same time, you see some of the problems with the age demographics. So a lot of your viewers are going to generally be quite older. A lot of our viewers are quite older. We're trying to move into some of the Instagram and TikTok space. Not on my phone, but we are moving towards that.
Yeah.
There has been a bit of a youth revolt around reform. I know reform isn't of the freedom movement, but it is somewhat anti-establishment in a way. So we might be seeing a bit of a youth revolt. But are you worried about the education system and the fact that children are being indoctrinated? It's what we have to do in order to persuade more people is we actually have to de-radicalize every single person. So it's not a level playing field at all. We have to work 10 times as hard to bring each person over to our
the point
side.
still remains that you have to keep fighting the battles wherever you can, and we need a large number of people to be doing something relatively small and easy that they can do. If we had 1 million people actively challenging their councils for what the education syllabus is for very young children, this is an emotive thing for people, for example, then we would start to make progress. We've got a large number of people starting to be active, and it's been fascinating to watch that the ULEZ, the clear air zones in cities, has really gripped people's interest in a way that many other subjects haven't. For me, child abuse, what's been happening with child abuse has always been a particular topic. That didn't gain traction with ordinary people, but blockage of the highways, restriction of roads, and the imposition of charging through the clean air system has really got people motivated to the extent they're going in to challenge local authorities. This is utterly brilliant. What we need is more people to be challenging different things in different areas, and I think we're on the brink of this happening because people are they're learning that to challenge they need to be accurate in their information, they need to know their stuff, and they need to be measured. It's no good going on a big demo and banging drums and walking down the street and shouting for whatever you want. Get in amongst the local authorities, challenge the MPs as to what they're doing wrong, and the council meetings. That's real progress, and I think we're beginning to see the power of that, where people are managing to get councillors to break ranks within their own council. Councillors have said, OK, I will actually talk to you about your concerns. So instead of them just being quashed, councillors are actually saying, no, I'll make the effort to listen to what you're saying, particularly in relation to challenges against Agenda 2030 programme, for instance.
But the other really positive thing is the number of people that are actively homeschooling, and we've got Hope Sussex here. You're involved with Hope Sussex, but it's not just Hope Sussex. It's right across the country. People are taking children out of school and making the effort and finding a way to make it work for them, because of course the economic realities of homeschooling are hard. It's tough for people, and I absolutely respect the effort that people are making to do this, but they are doing it in increasing numbers, to the point that government is now publishing documents on how concerned they are about the number of children that are outside the school system. And this is really positive development.
That's where they had the schools bill. So the schools bill, fortunately, was dropped. I think it's mostly to do with the Jewish and Muslim vote, because you have a lot of segregated communities that just don't want to conform there. So that has been a benefit of mass migration and segregation, strangely, because I don't think they've done it because of the English people who are choosing not to.
But it's one of the probably the only benefit of lockdown as well. Basically, nobody is suggesting that lockdown was a good thing, but in this area, because children were sent home from school, and they were parents were sent home from work, actually a lot of people began to look at what their children were actually starting to be taught.
And they're becoming quite disturbed.
Yes.
Across the country, there are lots of groups of a lot of mums, there's dads as well, where they're in these horrible battles because they've lost their children. But these are very hurt people. They're very stressed, they're very frightened, they're very nervous, they're very suspicious. And it's very difficult to get them to work together in groups, because it just takes a little spark and then there's a spat between them. And that's the most difficult thing, to work to get the people who've been harmed in this horrible system to come out the woodwork and work together with other survivors in order to tell their story. It's the publicity that does the damage, and I think we can help that happen to get a much bigger effect. And just to reinforce this for the audience, a a lady we spoke to, I was going to say who it was, I don't think I'm going to do that. A lady we spoke to, we did a report on her, and the local authority tried to get her committed to prison if she didn't succeed in getting us to take the report down. Now, this is very devious, because if our report had broken the law, that local authority would have come straight for the UK column. But UK column interview was mentioned inside a family court case, but they couldn't come to us because we'd followed the rules. What they tried to do is to bully the mother into taking the information down. What it told us was that our interview, which didn't say an awful lot of things that really needed to be said, frightened the pants off the local authority. And more people need to be doing this.
Well, one thing I did want to bring you onto, Brian, and you have mentioned this, was the abuse of children and children who are being taken away from their families and put through the so-called care system. Can you tell us what is the scale of the problem in this country with what's happening to children?
Based on cases that I'm going to say have come to me, mums mainly, but also dads that have come to me over the last 15 years, talking through their case of their children being taken by the state under false pretences. I believe we're looking at thousands of cases. And I can tell you, I'm here at this event, and yesterday morning at 10 o'clock my phone rang. It was a withheld number. Don't always answer withheld numbers, but I did answer it. And I ended up very quickly in a conversation with a very well-informed mother talking to me about her children being taken under false pretences by the state. That was the first one at 10:15 in the morning. And then yesterday during the day, another 3 mothers here at this event came to speak to me about their children being taken by the state. So either some incredible coincidence that happens to be 4 of them here, but 4 on one day. And the statistics are roughly that there's about 65,000 children in care. And you then start to look at money which circulates around children going into care. A lady sent me documentation recently about local authorities being paid a minimum of $35,000 for each child they can get into an adoptive placement. But anybody who takes on the care of children, fostering, or an organisation which is providing some form of home for children.
Oh, you say home, I would say probably imprisonment, but
well,
yeah.
Okay, but how much are they being paid? Well, people who are fostering children might be paid £500 a week for a child. If the child's got any form of special needs, that could easily be £700-800 a week. And for some of the organisations supposedly providing care for children with severe special needs, they could be paid £10,000 a week. So the moment the state or commercial interests get hold of children, huge amounts of money start to exchange hands, even before the children have been used for much darker things which can generate money, which of course is child pornography or sex with children. So, I mean, this is something which many years ago I knew nothing about, but mothers came to me talking about these cases, and I worked with a few of them in order to learn for myself what happened. I went into court as a Mackenzie friend to experience what they said about the family court. And of course, when they go into a family court, there is simply a judge, there's no jury, there's no press, or there wasn't at that stage, and the mother, or the mother and father, the parents of the child, are trying to fight a system where the local authority has got its own social workers, probably 2 of them. They're employing a barrister and a solicitor to fight for the local authority. And then a legal person called a guardian ad litem, a legal guardian is appointed for the child. And then usually at least one a specialist will be called to give a verdict on the mother's mental health. That'll either be a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. So the mother and father, in trying to fight for their children, are facing a team of maybe 7 or 8 people who are against them.
And saying that they're nuts.
Well, sometimes they don't say they're nuts, but the key weapon which is used is that children are taking on the risk of future harm. So this is thought crime. The parents haven't actually harmed the children now or previously, but somebody says, oh, we're worried that they're going to harm them in the future.
It's pre-crime.
Pre-crime.
It's Minority Report level stuff.
Yeah. And the system is particularly cruel because if it can take away one child, if the parents or the mother produces subsequent children, very often those children are taken away on the basis that the first children was taken away. So they just follow it through.
And that's 65,000 children who are being abused in this system. Do you think the system...
No, that wouldn't be true. That wouldn't be true. I'm simply saying that there's roughly 65,000 children in the care system.
I would say, and I put to you, that the system is inherently abusive in the way that it's set up.
Absolutely.
I would consider those children as being abused. I mean,
okay.
I've talked with a few people about changing the model of this, because back in the day, people used to have godparents, right? Or you could be non-religious, you can call them good parents or whatever you want, right? But you used to have people who were nominated. If you dropped dead or something, you became fully debilitated and couldn't look after your kids. Their job is to step in there and become that parent instead of you. And that wasn't the government. That was someone you choose, you nominate in your community.
Yeah.
And so the kids would not go to government. If someone, down the street had a run-in and their son was friends with your son, you might end up taking the boy in. The government wouldn't even be consulted. Do we need to move back to a system where we can even have some formalisation, but where every birth certificate, if you're going to have a birth certificate, I know there's a lot of debate about that, but if you are going to have one, where you put down who the godparents are and you can update that over time to have the people you want to step in if something happens to you.
Yeah, but we're in an era where the state is openly declaring that it has precedence in the parenting of children. And north of the border with the named person scheme, where the Scottish government was saying that every child would be allocated a social worker from conception, I believe it was. One of the lady members of the Scottish Parliament, I'm afraid I can't remember her name, but she's on record at a public meeting of saying to parents, don't worry, you will also have a role in bringing up the children. Right? So
this is Plato's Republic.
Well, whatever. But this is the reality of what's happening. So when I look here, and a lot of people have got children at this wonderful event, and any one of these parents could be accused of some form of wrongdoing, and their children could be taken away from them by social services, and they would then be in a battle that would probably destroy them, because a lot of the mothers and fathers cannot cope with going through a system where they have no redress to proper law in order to fight for their children. It's horrific.
Should people even bother trying to negotiate with people like this? I mean, if someone tried taking my children away from me, I would shoot them. I mean, I don't have kids yet, okay, but I tutor kids. But when I have kids, I would just shoot anyone who tried to take my kids from me.
Well, I'm going to say to you've chosen those words. There's a lot of parents who've absolutely fought for their children. But of course, if you go down that route, the state brings in the full force of the law. So,
but
many years ago, we opened a UK column news showing a little baby, a few weeks old, being ripped out of the arms of its mother by social workers who had put 2 police officers in the room with them in order to ensure that there was no physical interaction from either parent. And we also are in the situation at the moment where mothers and fathers are being given prison sentences for simply speaking out and talking about what's happened with their children in the family court system. In fact, the lady I spoke to yesterday morning had actually spent a week in prison as a result of fighting for her children. So you speak out as a parent saying what has happened, that your children have been taken with false evidence, false accusations, perjury, all sorts of things that they will say, and you speak out and you tell the public what's happened, and the result is you get a prison sentence because you've spoken about matters which should only be secret in the family courts.
But is there not somewhere that people just have to draw a line? I must confess here, I was in prison in this system when I was younger. I was taken away from my family. And I just think that there's a point at which you need to use violence to defend your children because it's self-defense. And at the end of the day, if people actually fought back, and this is why we have the right to bear arms in the Bill of Rights, 1688. I think if you're not going to physically fight back armed against someone taking your children, then I consider it weak.
Okay, but you're facing the monopoly of violence that the state holds. Okay, and an example of this is Wilfred Wong, who was involved in taking a child off the streets who was apparently going to be subject to some kind of abuse, but that was perceived as kidnapping, and he is now serving
17 years.
17 years at least in prison. But aside from that, we also have been involved with a number of cases where mothers have attempted to take their children out of the country in order to avoid them being taken by social services. And they have ended up being in court on charges of kidnapping. And one case in particular that Brian was involved with, where the jury was not told that that the person who was being accused of kidnapping was the mother. Right, so I understand your sentiment, but what you're facing is the entire, and if you attempt to take your child away when social services want to grab that child, you're going to see media reports, missing mother, help find this person. The person we present, you become the criminal straight away. Yeah. So the full force of the entire state is brought on you, on your head. And that's a hard thing. I understand where you're coming from, but that is a challenging thing to face.
I understand, and I do understand the difficulty. I just think if you don't have a red line somewhere, then you are going to end up with a collar around your neck and shackles on your wrists. And I think at some point you just have to go, if I am going to live in a society where people can take my kids at will, it's not worth living. It's better to go.
You're expressing a passionate view about this, which I got to say I understand. But what's interesting, overwhelmingly in the cases that have come to us, and I think this does form the basis for how people react across the system, most parents who come up against this system are simply not aware of how vicious it is and how devious, and
they get sucked into it.
They get sucked. Absolutely, that's the right
you
thing.
just got to do this report and this form and speak to this person, and it goes round and round in a circle.
It's not actually in their nature to be violent. What they try and do is reason with the system. They try and reason with it. But it's only when they're drawn into it that they suddenly realise their children are being got by a system that you cannot reason with. It's got a much darker agenda. About a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with a lady who's actually taken a child to Turkey in order to prevent British social services taking that child. the other safe haven is Northern Cyprus, which doesn't have an extradition agreement with UK. So there are mothers that
which
have
is
taken,
also Turkey, of course.
taken their children to Northern Cyprus.
Are there any other places? I know Russia doesn't have an extradition
Well,
treaty.
Russia would certainly feature, but most people, when they are looking for some form of sanctuary with their children, will try and go somewhere easy to visit overseas. And this is a big problem, because if they move anywhere within the European area, the European system will invariably side with the British family courts to return the children.
It's monstrous.
A lot of people ran to Spain, and they all got caught in Spain, and children brought back to the UK. Spain was sort of viewed as a...
Ireland, Southern Ireland, a lot of families went on the run to, thinking they could have sanctuary there. But eventually, in a couple of key cases, it was obvious that the Irish courts were subservient to the English courts when it came to matters to do with child protection.
I have to commend you, gentlemen, on covering all of these court cases, because it's something that we've tried to do at Resistance GP, but it's something that not many people really cover, and it takes a fair bit of time. It can often be quite boring. It can require a lot of attention to detail, and people often respond these days to video footage. So you've put a lot of dedication into covering this.
I mean, I have to say, Brian has put in unbelievable dedication into so many of people that have been on the wrong side of court cases, and that means hours and weeks and months of support for these people. And it's not something that personally I have ever really engaged in, because it's a huge commitment. But I've just been watching some of the post office inquiry coverage over the last few days, but each one of those sessions is 8 hours or 6 hours anyway, 6 hours at least, and Gareth Jenkins, who's been the latest, at least as of today, the latest witness there, that's been 4 or 5 days of 6 hours each day just to follow, and it's incredible commitment to I mean, I couldn't actually do that for the whole inquiry. Some people are doing it for the whole inquiry, but that's just an incredible commitment to do that.
You've just been watching video link.
I've been watching the live streams as much as I possibly could, but I haven't seen it all. But in order to actually get an understanding of that inquiry, so people have to be watching that for weeks now, and who can do that? Some people are, but
well, the good thing about having a video link is it enables individual people to go out there, look through, have their take, put out their evidence, and actually assess how the court is performing. Because over in the United States, in most states, you've got televised courts. And do you think now it's finally time for us to move to that system? Because there just seems to be so little justice and so little scrutiny.
It's still possible for people to go and sit in a courtroom and actually watch what's going on. A lot of years ago, I can't remember what it was, 2013 or so, there was coming back to the councils thing, there was an organisation in existence then called the People's Public Trust. I don't know if it still exists, but they used to just go into council meetings and just watch what was going on, and they would see items being dropped off the council agenda and so on, because the councils clearly didn't want to discuss certain things in front of an engaged public. But people have forgotten that the courts are still open for them to go, and child courts aren't, but other court cases are, and we should be. This is part of the democratic process, is actually to get involved and be seen to be witnessing justice being done, or the court or the council process or the House of Commons, whatever it is. But we don't have time, or we can't make the time anymore. We should really be trying to make that time, because that's part of what holds people to account.
I completely agree. I just think the problem is trying to convey all of the information to someone else. It's more difficult. I think if you can play the original footage, you can show people what originally happened, it's almost like you're out of step with the current technology. People are very much engaged by picture, video, and banning that essentially hides what's going on in the courts because it doesn't grab people's attention in the same way. It's handicapping court reports. I covered the appeal of the Simon Dolan case. You remember the Simon Dolan case, right? There were eight people in the public gallery, including me, and I was just the guy who turned up because I wanted to see what was going on. There were 8 people, and this was the great appeal against the lockdowns, locking up 70 million people.
Of course, the other thing that's happened is that in days gone by, particularly local papers would put their local reporters into the court. They would go into the magistrates' court, certainly into Crown Court, in order to report on cases for their readers. But then we got to the situation where newspapers are not involved in proper reporting anymore, and they're simply having young reporters sat in a room producing stories from web feeds. And those reporters are not going out doing the real job, which is out in the community to see what is happening, what's happening in the courts. So that to me is a big problem. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that the other thing, people have forgotten the power of juries. Juries have immense power because they are able to overturn bad law. But what's been happening across the board in courts is that effectively judges have been I've forgotten what the term is now, but they've been directing juries. But ultimately, the power is with the jury. Somebody can have committed a crime, and the evidence is there to show that they commit the crime. The jury can find them not guilty.
Conscientious acquittal, you mean? Yeah, well, they could have contravened a statute, but for it to be a crime, the jury would need to...
Well, the jury can decide whether that statute is under the circumstances
valid or not, and that's why
yeah.
you've got conscientious acquittal, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But the problem is, in '67, I believe, we moved away from unanimity that you needed to convict to only needing 10 out of 12. Do we need to bring back jury unanimity?
Personally, I don't think so.
I think we need people to know what it means to be on a jury. I think that's the key thing. People have got to understand what their role is on a jury, and most people don't. They go to a jury, they call for jury service, they go to a court, they're chosen to sit on the jury, and the only understanding they have of what that means is what they're told on the day by the judge. They don't go into the courtroom having an understanding of what their role actually is and the responsibility that they have and the power that they have.
Well, think of it like this, right? I've been to multiple court cases where I've seen people go down and there's been one holdout, and there's been one holdout. You can just tell. You've got the 2 hours, 10 minutes. So have you reached unanimous? No. Have you reached unanimous? No. Right? After 2 hours, 10 minutes, they can go, majority, and boom, straight away. During the lockdowns, how many people actually came out on the protests or did something to fight back? Was it even 1 in 12 people in the country?
Probably not, yeah.
So asking, 1 in 12 people to do, well, asking 3 out of 12 people to do the right thing when they've been taken away from their job and their family and they're very tired and it's all very confusing, and the other people can turn on them because they just want to go home. They're like, I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go back to my kids.
This is why, let's say, we have got an important role to encourage people to learn what being in a jury is really about and the power. So we need to educate them.
But even if you do educate people and you get through to, imagine you get through to 6 out of 10 people. So you gain, massive audience. You become bigger than one of the main news channels in this country.
Yeah.
You get through to 6 out of 10. Okay. Still, when it comes down to it, let's say only 2 out of that 6, only 1/3 of those people actually really have the courage to stand up. They'll still be outweighed. I can't see a jury decision as being legitimate unless it's unanimous.
Yeah, well,
because that's what they've got in the States. And if you try going, 10 out of 12, that's completely unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same over here. And I think Parliament's sort of arrogated to themselves the power to decide that and take away what is the most fundamental of our rights.
Yeah, well, I can accept that.
We always remember all of the people who've been with us for a long time, because it was the people that supported us and donated to us in those very early years that made the difference. And I remember when we were doing live talks then, people would come up to us and they would press £20 into our hands, or a fiver, or you get a cheque for £25. And it was a lot of relatively small donations which actually made it happen. And then later there were one or two, I'm going to say, more mature people who were very generous to us, and there is no way that we could have made this what it is today without the help of all those tremendous people who donated and supported us. And it's the members that count, because there are a lot of people who watch the news but they don't support us in any other way. And this is a great shame, because if we had more members supporting us, and we think that £5 a month is a very modest contribution, but if we had more people, it would enable us to expand faster. And that's what we've been trying to do. So we're saying thank you to you. Big thank you if you've been a long-standing member. If you're not a member of UK Column yet, perhaps you'd consider doing that, because that'd make our day.
I've got to commend you on all the work you've done. I know that you guys had quite a boost during the lockdowns in terms of people coming and supporting you. But I know now you're actually facing some quite difficult challenges in terms of,
I think everybody's facing difficult challenges. I think a lot of people that were drawn into this as a result of lockdown, a lot of people have drifted away because they're comfortable again, and they're not looking at the bigger picture and the direction of travel of many of the policies that are being proposed or imposed. And I think that's short-sighted of people. But at the end of the day, we wait for the next big imposition on us that reactivates these people again, because it's going to take those people to come back into the fight.
But the thing we must say is that it's a huge thank you to all the UK Column supporters, and I'm talking about people that support us financially with a monthly subscription. Those people, the core, have been unbelievably loyal, and they sustain the UK Column, and they ultimately give us the potential to still grow, which is our intention. And we couldn't have done what we've done without a core base of supporters. They've been brilliant. And here we've got a shop tent here with UK Column produce, and we've had a constant stream of people coming up to us and thanking us for what we've done. In fact, the common line is people approach us and say, "I'd just like to thank you for keeping us sane, or keeping me sane." And they're invariably talking about through the lockdown period. "I don't know what I would have done without you." And that's a huge boost to us, because we can echo back to them, well, you thanking us for keeping you sane keeps us sane, because we know that what we put out there had an effect.
I can testify to that, because I honestly, more people seem to be running after you to shake your hand and talk to you than Matt Letizia, and he's one of the greatest footballers ever. So
yeah, well, we have got a really strong support base, and a lot of these people have been with us for a very long time. So here, just over the last 24 hours, 3 people have come up to me and said, the last time I saw you was 15 years ago, and we've been supporting you ever since. So we're talking with people who've been with us a very long time, and that core base of support has never changed. But it is interesting that when people were getting anxious and spooked during lockdown, they came running to us and other media outlets. And then when they start to get comfortable again, oh, well, I don't need to do that. So they drift off. But we've got to recognise that it's the core base of our support which keeps us doing what we're doing. And we're not disappearing anywhere soon. We're busy looking at how we're going to expand what we're doing. So we're pretty optimistic as to where we are.
Good. So is there any sneak peek into your plans for the future, or is it?
No, aside from the event in October, and we're going to do much more. We're going to do more live events next year.
Yeah.
Because this is something we miss. So, which is why we're here, because we enjoy the sort of meeting people and shaking hands and whatnot. And that's why we did the sort of meet and greet on Parliament Square.
That was
a couple of years ago.
That was 3 years, I think
3
it
years
was
ago.
ago. Because I came down to that one.
Yeah, which was fun. Really loved it, and it was great. Everybody being there at the same time that Extinction Rebellion was there. It was good crack. So we do enjoy that.
We're going to try and broaden out what we're doing, and I think we're looking to the news. The UK column news, we know, is always pretty hard hitting. It's designed to be, because we're trying to get out 3 times a week what we see as the important things for people to pay attention to, what's really happening, what the government's really doing, despite what it's saying. But this is tough on people, and we also recognise that people are hungry for things where they're still being informed, but maybe it comes across in a little bit more of a relaxed style. UK column, from very early on, looked at what was happening with information to people, and we stepped somewhere into the middle. And you notice today I'm not wearing a tie. A lot of people say, why do you wear a tie? Why do you wear a tie? That's the noose. And I say, I wear a tie on the programme because it helps me relate to other people in this country who wear ties to work. I do it deliberately because they see me wearing a tie and they maybe think, well, okay, maybe he's okay. If I had a suit on as well, I'd probably be better, right? So we go down the middle, and there are only so many subjects you can cover before you start to pull away from the people we're really after, which are the people who haven't yet woken up or have just woken up. So people can say to us, you're not speaking about chemtrails, you're not talking about viruses, you're not talking about this, you're not talking about... No, we're not. Because the people who are just waking up can only cope with a few things at a time. And if you give them too much, they either just switch off or you actually start to mess up their heads because they get scared. And our view is that we've gone in for a niche. We're being successful in winning people who didn't really see anything, and now they do. And then we say there are many other very good people talking about these subjects. So when people start to research for themselves, they can go to a number of good sites where there's all sorts of research on chemtrails, for example, and other key subjects. But if we tried to do it all in 3 days news slots a week, we just end up losing, and we know this, people that we're trying to attract in the first place. So it's not we're not interested. We've talked about a lot of subjects, sitting in the tent since we've been here, and we've got individual opinions on it, but it's just for UK column. If you get into every subject going, you end up diluting the fact that you're putting across some really important information.
What I would say is I think you guys feel, not only are you a great show, but you also fill a gap for a lot of, I'd say, especially older people who you talked about being in the old style format, who feel comfortable with having their news in the old format. You've got your studio there, and the way that it's formatted.
Why have we done this?
I'm going to keep quiet.
The reason
as
we
the
did,
old person here, I'm going to keep quiet.
the reason we did this, right, was because we looked at the environment out there, and we see mainstream media over here, and we see alternative media over here, and there's actually quite a jump between getting from here to getting over there, and there's actually nobody in that space in the middle. So what we're trying to do is to help people across that gap.
And that's what I'm saying. You guys are a great bridge between, especially if you've got relatives who say, oh, but I need to watch the news, and you try showing them a video here, or you might show them one of our videos, and they go, oh, that's, and it just doesn't suit them. It's too different. But I think you guys are a fantastic bridge, especially when you've got people who are slowly waking up a little bit, don't want to look at lots of different clips and videos and go to lots of different places. They want something that's a really good staple. And you guys are a fantastic bridge for that.
Right. We see that one of the key jobs is to get more people to understand they're being deceived and that the government is actually attacking them. And the expression is waking them up to what's really going on. But you can't throw everything at them. So what we try and do is get them a few steps up the ladder. And then the moment they start to realize, oh, this is not what I thought it, they're learning from us that something they thought is not quite as it seemed to them. So they're starting to look and question things themselves. Then you can introduce new subjects. But there are people who are very knowledgeable on a whole range of subjects, and they sort of say to us, why don't you cover this subject and this subject and this subject and this subject? Because if we did that, the average person that's just starting to say, well, there's something going on, you swamp them. In fact, I think some of them you could really depress them. So we are aiming at people who are not awake, or they're waking up, beginning to realize something's not right, and we help them up the first few steps of understanding. Then when they get motivated and they're starting to research and check things out themselves, then they will go and look at a whole range of other things. And they might say, well, I watch the UK column still, but I then go to this channel because I'm interested in this. And so we act as a bridge. And I'm going to say it works because we've got a lot of professionals who are engaging with us, and they're comfortable with us, they trust us. And I think partly that is because we don't use bad language. We come across, we hope, in a professional way. And so they feel comfortable in working with us because we're not too far away from their realm of normality.
Yeah, where they feel comfortable. And I think that is excellent.
And I just add here, I always get teased, but you still wear a tie. So when I present, I still wear a tie, and I still wear that tie because.
So this is an exclusive, essentially.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, here I'm relaxed.
You're showing a bit of chest for the ladies.
Here I'm relaxed, but I wear that tie because other people who wear ties in their professional job can relate to me. And you may say this is a very small thing, but I actually think it makes a difference because there are a lot of professionals out there. They put on their suit and they put on their tie to go and do their professional job. And so when you echo back to them that you understand this dress code, you're giving them a little bit of confidence that they can relate to you. Mike stays casual, so maybe we got a bit of both in the UK column team. But
you slum it every now and then.
Yeah, but we're not in big pink-coloured spectacles, and we're not flashy like some of the other people who are doing really good work, but the style of their programs is different. So. Now, the politicians, I think they're largely puppets. I think they're controlled. And one of the key ways that they're controlled is the whips. But the key thing is we know that amongst the politicians, there is a climate of fear. They know enough about their own system and problems in that system to be fearful of it. And that's pretty incredible if they claim that they're the key drivers of a democracy to keep us all safe. So what am I talking about? Well, if we talk to politicians who are speaking out, we might choose Andrew Bridgen. He's another one of the politicians that says, yes, I've got support from other MPs, but the trouble is they're all scared. They are scared that they will do to them what was done to Andrew Bridgen. So this idea that we're in an upstanding democratic state is simply nonsense. And it's the power of the funders to the parties, millions of pounds going in from individuals or big corporations to all the main parties. So the real power isn't the political power, it's the people who supply the funding to keep that political power going.
So, last question, and it's a bit of a big one, but where do you think, you're fighting back against the system, where do you think the whole system is going? What is the goal of all of these shadowy groups who are controlling everything? Where do we go if we don't fight back?
I'll wait for Mike to see what you're going to come up on that. I think we'll come to the same point.
Where do we go if we don't fight back? We're going to hell if we don't fight back. But we got to start resisting. But in whatever way. I think we all know that if we look at where we're going with AI being brought into courts, if we're looking at the war agenda as it's developing, and a whole host of other areas, the medical surveillance, the biosecurity, the biosurveillance agenda that's going on, Agenda 2030, which is a modernization of Agenda 21. We know where this is going. So people have got to start saying no to that firmly. I still think back to 2003 and 1 million people being on the streets to say no to Tony Blair, and Tony Blair said, "To hell with you, I'm doing it anyway," and those 1 million people didn't come back out on the streets again, and that was a mistake. And we've got to realize that if we're going to win this, we can't stop. It's like the Terminator. We've got to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back and saying no. But that's hard for people because people get disillusioned and they get disappointed and so on, and they're constantly looking for some kind of knight in shining armor to come and save them. People have got to start realizing that no, this is a commitment that's a lifetime commitment, and we've got to be not giving up too easily. Keep fighting, because it doesn't end until it ends. But until it ends, we got to keep fighting.
Evil never sleeps.
Right.
Well, you used the word. I believe we're up against a malicious, evil system. And this manifests itself through the entire political system in UK, but you also see it echoed in Europe and the US. And to me, what does this system want to do? It wants to destroy us as normal, happy human beings. It hates us, and this is a very difficult thing for people to accept. I've started to put in the occasional comment on the news that if you can't understand what the government is saying to you, what the policy is, try thinking that it's the opposite of what you think. And the other thing is that the government is actually attacking its own people. And this is not because it wants more taxes out of us. It actually wants to destroy us as functioning human beings. It does not want happy people. It doesn't want families that are working in a happy, coherent way. It wants to absolutely destroy humankind in a loving, properly functioning way. But it wants to stop that. And this has taken me a while in the time that I've been doing what I'm doing to get my head around this, but I feel very comfortable in this. If you say, what are they trying to do? They are trying to utterly destroy us. They're destroying the way we live. They're destroying our foods. They're destroying our ability to work. They're destroying the minds of our children. This is an attack on mankind. and people have got to really wake up and smell the coffee, and they've got to start doing something.
On that note, it's ukcolumn.org.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Please give us a like, a share, a subscribe, hit the notification button if you would like to help. We've got a Patreon and a Subscribe Star, so please head on over there and pledge us some support if you want to keep this journalism going. We've got a professional studio here, and we could do with your support to keep these great conversations coming. Oh, word association.
Oh,
Terribly sorry.
Oh,
Okay, quickly,
what's
2 minutes. Freedom. First word that comes into your head.
Is this a psychiatric?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh my God.